Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Feign disorder and crush him. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Modern warfare has penetrated the information ecosystem using ideological weapons. Today, wars are waged in many ways, and there are many ways to exert power over foreign nations. ISIS puts a lot of effort to recruit new fighters for their jihad using social media. China gives major loans to African nations, builds infrastructure to establish trade and to obtain natural resources. Iran and Saudi Arabia are in a proxy conflict through opposing forces in Syria, Yemen and other countries. Russia shows its superior electronic military capabilities in Syria and Ukraine. We'll focus on the last actor, Russia, and its continuing involvement in the politics of USA, particularly when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement and United States elections. BLM got a lot of traction after the video of a police officer handling of George Floyd was released on the internet. Russia has two modes of operation: open mode with heavy use of military, as seen in Syria and Ukraine, and covert, which is much more difficult to identify. Operations of the second type are informational warfare. It's not a new thing. Russians experienced it themselves over 100 years ago with the encroaching Russian Revolution of 1917. Then they made heavy use of propaganda and ideological subversion during the Cold War.
Not necessarily. You see, the tactic of subversion, about which I'm talking, is similar to the martial art, the Japanese martial art. If some of you are familiar with that tactic, probably you will remember that if an enemy is bigger and heavier than yourself, it would be very painful to resist his direct strike. If a heavier person wants to strike me in the face, it would be very naive and counterproductive to stop his blow. The Chinese and Japanese judo art tells us what to do. First to avoid the strike, then to grab the fist and continue his movement in the direction where it was before, right? Until the enemy crashes in the wall. You see? So, what happens here? The target country obviously does something wrong. If it's a free democratic society, there are many different movements within the society. There are obviously, in every society, there are people who are against this society. They may be simple criminals, ideologically in disagreement with the state policy, conscientious enemies, simply psychotic personalities who are against anything, right? And finally, there are a small group of agents of a foreign nation, bought, subverted, recruited, right? The moment all these movements will be directed in one direction, right? This is the time to catch that movement and to continue it until the movement forces the whole society into collapse, into crisis, right? So that's exactly the martial art tactic. We don't stop an enemy. We let him go. We help him to go in the direction we want them to go.
This was a quote from Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent from the early 1980s. Now we live in a much more open world, connected through a globalized information highway. How this judo technique can be done today? Russians are joining and building strong, cohesive communities based on identity and group membership. Black communities, LGBT, Confederates, anti-LGBT, etc. People in such groups feel that their identity is grounded in the identity of the group, and very often they have an equally strong opposition. Once a cohesive group is established, agents in the community gain trust by sharing and posting materials that the group feels strongly about. They may share ACAB memes and #defund the police calls in BLM and Antifa groups. People feel the agents belong to the tribe, they are seen as one of us by the rest. After a while, they may share more extreme content, appeals to take you to the streets, we've waited long enough sentiments, etc. They may also post content that's outside of the immediate interest of the community, anti-American or anti-government articles and memes that are aimed at warming up the image of the foreign state, for example by picturing them as the underdog who has to fight off the imperialist onslaught of the USA. These types of materials are more readily accepted because it looks like it's what we think. It seems that real members of the group genuinely believe that. The use of algorithms and internet platforms for information warfare is called computational propaganda. Phil Howard and Sam Woolley of the University of Oxford define it more precisely as the use of algorithms, automation, and human curation to purposefully distribute misleading information over social media networks. Now it's easier than ever before to reach the enemy, implant some ideas, and nudge the population towards a certain direction. Some accounts generate novel content, other bot accounts amplify it by sharing, liking, commenting, engaging. Some accounts attack the other side of the discourse, including in the automated ways. This makes it seem like much more people are passionate and vocal about BLM, racism, gun control, the police, and related issues. This tactic is known as manufacturing consensus. The practice of nudging members of a group to strongly voice their opinions, to be active, to go to the protest, to not let the others get their way, is a form of stochastic terrorism. Each radical move, each individual bottle thrown at the police, each building devastated by graffiti, each looted store, each burned car is increasing the chances of future acts of violence and destruction, especially when these things happen at night in an angry crowd of masked, anonymous individuals. Some sock puppet accounts may create and propagate All Lives Matter and other anti-BLM content for the sole purpose of energizing legitimate BLM folks to respond in kind, propelling the spiral of animosity. This creates further cohesion of the BLM and Antifa communities, while at the same time creating stronger divisions in the society at large. This is a method of jump-starting a genuine conflict in a society.
It's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter where the division line goes. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms, that is destabilization process. The sleepers, many of whom are simply KGB agents, become leaders of the process of destabilization.
Racial tensions in USA already are high. There already are groups of people sharing opposing sentiments, so they were a straightforward target for Russian meddling. The reports show that these groups were infiltrated before the 2016 presidential elections, as far as 2013, and the scale of the operation was huge. Russians were present on all major social media platforms. They generated huge data volume, including millions of tweets and retweets, more than 1,000 of YouTube videos, over 100,000 Instagram posts, and 60,000 Facebook posts. The main purpose was to discourage Black Americans from voting for Hillary Clinton, which also meant discouraging them from voting altogether. There is another powerful nation-state that is very interested in US 2020 election results, China. Whereas Russian operations are clearly directed to sway voters to Donald Trump, China is rooting for Joe Biden. Trump has been anti-China leading up to 2016 election. His administration has introduced many sanctions against China and Chinese corporations. The Democrats would likely be more lenient towards the Chinese and could lift some important bans. Beijing's strategy is to make alliances and exert power through trade deals. Many US corporations are perfectly aware that they could engage in profitable business with the Chinese, provided the Democrat nominee wins the election. So it's only logical they engage in rallying up support for Biden. But so far, I haven't been able to find any support for a direct involvement of the Chinese government to try to influence the results of the election. And certainly not with the scope and with means we see from the Russians. It's very likely that Russia has considerably increased the funding, scope, tactics and quality of such operations. They had some positive results, they know they could do better. They know they have to make their accounts look more realistic, hide behind VPNs, have better social connections that don't look like botnets. They know their accounts need to be even more trustworthy online, more engaging, with more social capital. They just had to wait for a good moment to strike. Immediately after the footage of the George Floyd incident hit the social media, it went viral. Russians had been given the perfect gift. A shocking event rooted in an extremely divisive issue in a critical moment, the 2020 election year. A gift of the material the Russians have around 6 years of experience with. All the tactics mentioned previously were certainly used in 2020 but perfected. Russians may have devised new plans, new methods of keeping the fire going and of mobilizing the angry to take it to the streets. I suspect that future research will show a concerted effort by the Russians to influence the Black Lives Matter movement to meddle in 2020 presidential elections. We can expect to see some narrative laundering operations by GRU, setting up publications and fake authors to produce content which is then shared on social media by bots and SOC accounts, and then also by genuine Americans unaware of the source and the real intent of these articles. We may find entire websites, posts and Facebook, Reddit, Discord groups that are managed and steered by the Russians. This is what GRU has been doing for Ukrainians since the 2014 Euromaidan protests. We may have to wait for the researchers to obtain and properly analyze the data to get a better picture of the currently ongoing Russian narrative attack on American citizens. But one thing is for sure, they are on it and they are getting better. And American love for freedom of expression makes it particularly hard to shut down potentially malicious information flows of foreign origin. Be sure to check out the links, you'll find there many interesting reports and articles related to the subject.